Good morning. Can you hear me, Tim? Okay, great. If I 2 evenings of speaking over like noisy bars and music, yeah, it's taking it straight. Okay, so today I'm talking about Travis CI, and just to set a little bit of context, we're using Travis CI, and the intention of this presentation isn't to say you should be using Travis CI over other solutions, but we are. So I wanted to share our experiences with using it. Some of you are doing continuous integration and using some alternatives. Maybe you can learn from it, and we can talk after about our different experiences. Others may not be using continuous integration at all. And from that perspective, I would like to present Travis CI as an option for CI that I believe is very accessible, and I hope to cover that in the presentation. So I've got about 5 years doing mainly Drupal development. I've got a lot more experience doing developing web applications, but I've been focused on delivering Drupal sites for the last 5 years. And I'm currently a senior developer at eLife Sciences. And I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges that we've got there and how using continuous integration is helping us to release with confidence. So eLife Science is an open access journal. We publish under the Creative Commons license, and it's hosted by a company called Highwire Press, and they're based in San Francisco. So all our releases are done by them, and we present them as pull requests. We'll see what a pull request is if you don't know. I've got a couple of demos of how to prepare a pull request. So our site was originally built by Highwire on their self-titled distribution. As far as I know, I don't believe that project has been given back to the community, but they're hosting a lot of journal websites. So a little bit about our development process. We have a GitHub repo which is forked from the Highwire repo containing just the eLife custom modules or the contrib modules which are specific to our website and also our theme. Code is submitted to Highwire for release by submitting a pull request. That's our opportunity to get not just code, because we're not just submitting code, but to make all changes to our website, we do it via a pull request. Highwire review, and then after feedback, or if everything goes okay, they merge in that pull request and they release the code to live every Wednesday. So if we miss that opportunity, if something goes wrong, then we've got to wait another week in order to fix it. So we want to be quite sure that that is going to take. So it's important that we understand what experience they're going to have when they receive that pull request and when they try and integrate it with their code base. So Highwire maintain 2 other repositories. They've got one where they put Drupal core, and then one which has the Highwire specific custom code, which is for the platform that serves all of the websites that they host. And also one, no, that's it. Yeah, the 2, I didn't mention them. It contains those modules, libraries, and themes. Does anyone have any questions about that? So developers work on a fork of the eLife Sciences repo. So eLife Sciences have forked Highwire's repo, and then individual developers fork that repo. So Lisgo, which is my GitHub tag, I have a fork of that Git repository. So developers work locally. We actually use Vagrant, and we create a feature branch which would describe the problem that we're taking on, or the new feature that we're working on. And we do it from the stable branch, which is supposed to represent the code which is on live. And once our work is done, we prepare a pull request to the eLife Sciences repo. And the pull request is reviewed by another member of the eLife team, and it's merged after review. It's merged just in the eLife Sciences repo, and then it's prepared as a pull request and submitted as a pull request to Highwire. But what does done mean? Well, done is never done until the feature is released to production. So done involves release management. So let's learn a little bit about Highwire's release process. So they review pending pull requests, and they prepare a staging version of the site with code from pull requests merged in. And then they run update hooks. Does everyone know what an update hook is? Yeah. And then they ensure the site is working as expected. And if it checks out, then they'll merge the code into the stable branch, and they'll repeat the deployment process to the production server. And manual steps are avoided. So what I mean by that is that we're submitting the pull request, and we give them very specific guidelines about how to integrate that. And for us, that's running 2 drush commands: drush update db, which will trigger the update hooks, and drush clear cache all. And that's our opportunity. So we don't variate from that. We don't say, well, for this one, revert this feature, enable this module, disable this module. We just send them that, and everything else is done in update hooks. We have had one instance since I've been there where we had to give them another command because it involved a migrate, and we didn't want to use those 2 commands. But for the most part, we're pretty rigid on that. It's got to get through just for those 2 commands. So done means that the developer can expect that their code will get released to production. We release often, so we know that what experience Highwire are going to have when they get our code. So we reduce our stress by releasing often. This is a quote from a book called Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and David Valley. It's a really great book. Integration is often a very painful process. If this is true on your project, integrate every time somebody checks in and do it from the start of the project. If testing is a painful process that occurs just before release, don't do it at the end. Instead, do it continually from the beginning of the project. If releasing software is painful, aim to release it every time somebody checks in a change that passes all the automated tests. And we haven't quite taken on that whole challenge, but we're moving in that direction. So just as an aside, the development tools that we're using PHP Storm, which helps us, it gives us monitors to ensure that we're coding to Drupal coding standards. It gives us easy access to documentation, and it allows us to step through code with things like XD. But we use Vagrant, and that allows us to have a common development environment. So it's easy to reset the site and to get new devs started on the project. And it's easy to set up integration environments. So with Vagrant, we just can deploy to AWS really easily using the same build scripts. And we use Travis CI, and this builds an instance of the site on every push to GitHub, and it runs tests, unit tests, functional tests, and behavioral tests. And we're going to see some demos of that in a bit. So Travis CI is a hosted continuous integration service. That straight away is a problem for some teams. Some teams wouldn't select it for that reason, but for us it wasn't a problem. It integrates really well with GitHub, and we'll see that in the demos. It's a free CI service for public repositories, which increases its appeal because it's free. But it also has other benefits as well, and it means it's accessible. So similarly with GitHub for public repositories, as in everyone can see it. Similarly, when on the CI side, when it's building it, the reports are public as well. So you can see when they're passing and see the reports and see how it's stepping through the builds and what tests it's running. So that makes it accessible, and you can learn from that. It detects build scripts, which is a file called .travis.yaml in the root of the repo, or of the main project, or of pull requests as they're coming in. So if the pull request is able to be merged, so if they've rebased, then that shouldn't be a problem. But occasionally they won't merge automatically. But if it does merge automatically, it will trigger a build because it's capable of doing it. Otherwise, it'll send it back and say, please resolve these conflicts, probably by doing a rebase. So this is what I scoured the internet for a really simple .travis.yaml file. This hasn't been used for like a serious project. This is just an example project, but I decided to take this on so we can see what the experience is like. So this guy called Matt Andrews, he's at the Financial Times. He just published this public GitHub repository that you guys could fork yourselves and test the build on Travis CI yourself. And all it is, he sets the language. He actually set it to Sass. Sass isn't a recognized language by Travis CI, so it should be Ruby. But before the install, he runs install Sass, and that installs Sass, and then the script runs the Ruby file, travis.rb. That's it. I'm not taking a snippet of the .travis.yaml file. That's it. So what does this travis.rb file do? All it's doing is it's running Sass on a CSS file and telling it where to output, and it's not it. If that script fails, then the build will fail. It'll exit with a 1 instead of a 0, and then the build will fail. So all it's testing for is to ensure that there's no errors in your Sass file, and if there aren't, then the build will pass. So he submitted a pull request to himself, labeling it, this is a bad pull request. And this is what he did. He created a branch of his project, and he put in some bad CSS, and then he submitted it as a pull request. This is what the diff file would look like on GitHub, this new line of CSS. But because of the integration with Travis CI, we're getting these other indicators that we might not want to merge this in. So it's left to human error. You might look at that bad CSS and think it looks fine to me, but Travis has a different thing to say about it, and it integrates with GitHub and gives you these indicators, these monitors as well, saying that the build's failed. So you can click on the build and find the details of why it failed. It goes through the build script, and he's interested in the test portion of it. The build succeeded, but the test failed, and it tells us here why it failed. It's not a brilliant report, but it's enough to tell us that something went wrong, and you might want to look at a certain line of code in your .scss file. Now, because it was a public repository, the person submitting the pull request could have seen this anyway and fixed it before the maintainer of the project even saw it, and then follow up with an improved pull request. So I decided to send a pull request. I actually did this, so I'm contributing to his little project. And I thought, well, I'll get rid of his bad CSS. I submitted it as a pull request, and this was my experience. So I forked the project into my personal GitHub account, and then I cloned it locally. Can you all see that okay? Yeah? I created a branch of it called feature, what did I call it? Fix bad pull request. So you can't see that there. For that reason, I brought up the file on the screenshot earlier. But I just put I tried to annotate the bad CSS out, and I'm going to push it up to my repo, not to his, to mine. I don't think I've even got permissions to do it to his. So I push it up to mine, and then I'm going to prepare a pull request and send it to his master branch. So if you aren't used to GitHub, you do the pull request actually in the GitHub interface. I'm just sending him a message. So I'm sending it from my repo and my branch to Matthew Andrews' master branch. And there it's prepared. Now we're going to jump to Travis CI. And I'm watching his project here, not my own. I could have monitored my own Travis CI, but I'm monitoring his in the pull request tab. And it's going to, I can see the build as it's happening. I'll just skip forward because it takes a bit of time to kick in. But it's running the SAT install. And then it'll run the test. So it's installing SAT now. And it fails. We get an indicator up here that it failed. The Ruby code exited with a 1, so it failed. And Matt got back to me, and he'd seen that it failed, and he says he suggested how I might fix it. But he did say either way it was just an example, and it doesn't really need fixing. But it was nice of him to get back to me. So I sent another pull request, correcting my bad CSS, and I'm going to jump forward a bit here, but I'm just doing the very same thing as I did before, although I didn't need to fork it again or prepare some code on that feature branch, and then submit it again as a new pull request because it closed that one down. And this time it passed. And oh yeah, this is a view what he might see when he sees that pull request come in. He goes you can go to GitHub to review that pull request, and if Travis CI is integrated, then he gets this indicator that you might want to hold off merging it in because Travis is doing a build, and it will report back whether it failed or passed. And if it does pass, this is what he gets. Anyone got any questions about that step? There is another demo looking at Drupal example of this, but I just thought that was a useful example to just boil it down to just something very definite, you know. So our Travis.yaml file is a little bit different, but we've done it using Travis CI. We needed a database. We wanted Drush set up, equivalent web server. A lot of people are using Drush run server on Travis CI and locally as well, just for testing purposes. vhost configuration, and Drupal needs to be installed. We need a database imported, and for eLife we do import the database and then run update hooks and clear cache as well. But if you're working on a new build, I advocate an approach, not just me alone, but a lot of people advocate an approach where you get everything to, on the install, everything to be set up, so everything in code, and maintain it much as you would a distribution, much like Commerce Kickstarter, which I've based a lot of my own work off. So we also need code from 3 repositories, so the Travis CI will automatically check out the project that it's monitoring. But we are cloning 2 other private repositories as well. So there's some complexities there. But why do all the work, right? So someone else has probably solved the same problems. And on public repositories, ours is a private repository at the moment, and we pay for that as subscription. But there's a lot of people doing similar stuff on public repositories. We can review their build script, their .travis.yaml file, and then we can beg, borrow, and steer from them. So use their code as a starting point, and use code that's passed. That's a tip Yeah, if it goes around, you can see. Yeah, use that one. So for us, the starting point was a project put together by Graham Taylor at Capgemini. He did a presentation a couple of years ago with Andrew Larkham about BHAT, but they prepared a public Git repository, and they had a Travis build in there, and it basically did most of what we needed to do. So I used that as a starting point. But here are some other examples. The Open Scholar distribution is an example of a distribution that is using Travis CI. It's a public project. They're running BHAT tests as their verification that the builds happened okay. And there's a Panoply module, which a lot of projects on Drupal.org are starting to think about integrating Travis builds. So they'll host the Git repo on Drupal.org and on GitHub, so that the builds can be triggered automatically. And also, I've prepared a project called eLife Kickstart. What I was finding, I was using Commerce Kickstart a lot, Kickstart version 2, when I started new projects, and then stripping out everything out that I didn't need. And so I put a bit of work in to create a better starting point for me, so I didn't have to do that every time. And I'll do a little bit more work on that, but it's usable now, so you can fork that and take a look if you wanted to start a new project. There's a Travis.yaml file in there. So I think by default, as soon as you fork it and start watching it on Travis CI, it'll perform a build, and it'll give you, there's one BHAT test that just goes to the home page and checks for a status 200 and the title or something like that. So it's just to get you started with it. So if you do use that and you have good experiences or bad experiences, let me know. So we're going to look at what a Travis.yaml file will look like. You normally declare a language. For us, that's PHP. The default is Ruby. And you can specify which version or which versions of PHP you want to run. So why would someone want to put versions? If they're developing a contributed module or a distribution, they'll want to ensure that it works, whatever version, not whatever version, but for specific versions of PHP. You can also set environment variables. So this was I took this off the Panoply example. On every push to the GitHub repositories, they trigger multiple builds for multiple environments. So multiple versions of PHP, and they want to test the different branches as well. So it starts off this matrix of builds. We haven't been using that. We just do one. We have one version of PHP because we are trying to replicate our server, our production environment. We're not maintaining a public project. We set up a MySQL database. This is an example. These are just the highlights of the Travis.yaml file, not everything you might put in there. We create a database, install Drush, and then get the libraries needed for BHAT using Composer. And then we import our database, or for testing install profiles, you can install using Drush. And then on the script portion, that's where you want to run your tests. So for us, that's BHAT and simple test. So this is how you would trigger your BHAT builds. BHAT tests, sorry. And then after running your scripts, you can do some steps. So you might want to output the error log just in case something went wrong. Then you've got to monitor because it's difficult to see what went wrong on Travis builds. And then you could get notified either by email, or you can push it out to your room on IRC. And you could also deploy your application. If it passes all the acceptance criteria and it passes all your tests, then you might wish to deploy it, and you could do it. Here's an example of how you would deploy a Heroku app. Or you could do something a bit more custom using the after success step. You could create a tag and commit that to your Git repository. So I've got a demo here of of an install profile, a custom install profile, and I'm going to be doing a lot of fast forwarding because we're doing waiting for like Travis builds and stuff like that. I'll pause it if you've got any questions at any time. This is going to take much of the remainder of the time, and then we've got a few slides after. So if you've got any questions, this is appropriate to ask them now. Okay, so this is a project that I created called DCY 2014. It's an install profile, and on the install, it's going to enable all the core stuff and some contributed modules as well. I've got 2 custom ones, but they're not really doing much. They're just sort of placeholder modules. As I said before, it's basing it off the Commerce Kickstart, but I used eLife Kickstart as my starting point. So I'm going to just preparing, just pulling down the code and opening it up in Sublime because I'm going to be doing some work on the project. And I use Git Tower for my Git client, so just making sure that's set up. I ran through this yesterday, a Cafe Nero, which didn't have it in it. So the test, my starting project is a project that had been building successfully on Travis.yaml, using the Travis.yaml file. This is the build that had happened previously, and as you can see in the top right-hand corner, it was passing. And what I want to demonstrate here is I'm going to write some tests to cover behavior that hasn't been implemented yet, and then implement it. I can test it locally, but allow Travis CI to test the integrity of my builds. What I wanted to show here is that when you sign in, this is a public repository, so it didn't require that I subscribe to anything. And when you want to start watching a project, you sign in to Travis ci.org, and you add the repository, and it'll bring up all of your publicly available Git repositories, and then you can select which ones you want to watch. So I'm watching a few here, and here we've got the DCY 2014, and that's switched on. So it's very easy to do. You could also do it on GitHub as well, but it's a lot simpler if you do it in Travis. So it's running 2 tests here. It's just going to the home page and making sure the title's okay, making sure you don't see a logout link if you're an anonymous user, and then it checks as an administrator, as a user with the administrator role, goes to the home page, checks for the same title, and that you do see a logout link, and it's passing. It's using the Drupal, the VHAT Drupal extension, and there are different APIs for that. I'm using the Drupal API driver, which stipulates that the VHAT has to be run on the same server that the site is set up. There are different ones that allow you to do things remotely, but this one doesn't. Okay, so here's my feature file, my VHAT feature file, and I'm just going to amend it to cover some behavior, as I said, that isn't happening on the site. And I'm going to create a scenario outline rather than a scenario, and swap out administrator for a placeholder called role. And I want to test the behavior for the administrator role, and also a role that doesn't exist called editor, that I won't give as many permissions as the administrator, but I do want the editor to be able to see a logout link when they log in. So I've written that test, and I'm installing VHAT locally, so I'm gonna run it locally before I push it up to Oh yeah, I have to install the site apparently. So I do that using the drush command. And then I'm setting up my local environment, my bhat.local.yaml file, which is included in my bhat.yaml file. And I just need to give it the route to my Drupal install for the Drupal API driver. And then I'm going to run the tests. Am I? Oh no, I'm going to run a web server first. So this is just showing that the site is installed. This is what I've done. And it's just going to run through those two scenarios. And it failed. It failed on the editor role. It failed because the editor role doesn't exist. So I'm going to create a feature branch and give it an appropriate name. So not only are we focusing on Travis CI here, you're also getting a view in on the type of Git workflow that we're using. But I'm going to create a feature branch, and I've amended that home.feature to add that new testing that was failing. And I'm just going to push that up to my Git repo. And we won't watch this whole build, but we know it's going to fail. But I just pushed it up there anyway, just to back it up because I was going on. And that build, that will fail, just as it failed for us locally. So now I'm going to create the editor role. Run bhat again. And it passes because the editor role now exists. So when I log in as the editor, go to the home page, I see I log out. But that's not going to work on our Travis CI build because it's going to build it again. So it's not going to add that editor role for us. So we've got to put it in a feature. So I'm creating a feature now, which will create the editor role for us, and I'll enable that feature as part of the install process. So I'll add it as a dependency to my install profile, in my .info file as my install profile. Features has a cool option where it actually allows you to not only download the feature, but you can specify where it will go, and it will write it to the right place for you. So it has actually created some code for us. And when we go to, oh yeah, I'm just adding the dependency now. I'm adding in the info file the line to enable that module. Okay, so I'm going to push that up. We see there that the new module was created, and we verify that the dependency has gone in. And I'm going to commit that and push that up. So the build started. So installing bhat and its dependencies. It's installing Drupal. It's installed now. Where is it? Well, I think I've skipped ahead here. It's not. Save. setting up Selenium, which is one of the steps of my build script, so I can test behavior in an actual browser, test things like JavaScript behaviors. I'm only monitoring the Travis builds here so that you see what's happening. You'd normally just let this happen in the background. Okay, so it's running the BHAT test now, and I expect that, I know that they'll all pass. It creates the role for us, and it verifies that when you log in as the editor user, you go to the homepage, you'll see the logout link. So I'm going to do one more, add one more feature, and that is to give the editor role permission to edit any page content. There's a page content type, and I want to give it the editor the permission to edit any content type. Not any content type, specifically the page content type. So this is a feature that I prepared earlier called the editor feature, and I'm going to save it to my features folder as call it editor.feature, and it just describes, it just lays out one acceptance criteria. We'll see that when it's actually loaded into Sublime. It's a little easier to see. So I'm using, in order to test this behavior, I need to use the Drupal BHAT extension. So that's targeted by using the tag API. And just so that you can see what's happening, it doesn't require JavaScript, but I'm tagging it with JavaScript so that when I run it locally, you're going to see it happening in an actual browser. So just a little BHAT thing here. So given I'm logged in as a user with the editor role, that is going to create an editor. It's not going to create an editor role. It's going to create a user, assign it to the editor role for us. When I'm viewing a page node with the title new page, it's going to create a node of the type page and give it a title new page. Then I should see it will visit that page for us. I should see the heading new page. It will verify that we can see the heading. And I should see the link edit. I would only expect to see the link edit if I can edit that content. You could probably write a better test for it, but this is just an example. And then after it's run, it cleans up after itself. So it'll delete that editor user, and it'll delete that content that it only needed for the test. So I'm going to run that locally before I even, why not? Like, it also gives the benefit of seeing what happens in the browser. Yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
What's the file extension for the BHAT command? That file?
Dot feature.
Dot feature.
Yeah.
That's what I recommend.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Although I did the demo, I didn't edit the demo because I called it .feature.yaml by accident. Yeah, because I specified that it'd be a YAML file in Sublime, so I added that extension. So I'm removing it. It didn't run it first time, and it'll run it when I call it .feature. Yeah. So it's gonna. I've got Selenium running in the background, and it's going to use that as the driver, and it's using. It'll run tests in Firefox, and we can see it created a user, created content for us, visit that page, and it's checking to see if we can see an edit link. And we can't see an edit link because we haven't granted the permission. So I'm going to grant the permission in Drupal, and then I'm going to add that to the feature code. and then export it into the feature code, and then it should work, right? So I'm adding the permission, and then I'll go to the feature, recreate the feature, bring that permission into the scope of that feature, and generate that feature again. And then if I run that again, well, I'm going to push it now. Yeah, I'm actually pushing that up, and I'm also going to just run it locally. So I pushed that up to Travis. Travis is testing it, and I'm testing it locally here as well. Now it's saw the edit link because I added that permission. So the tests should all pass now, and they did. So you'd expect it to pass on Travis, right? Because it works well. See what happens. Suspense. Can't wait to find out. Just running through the test now, and it failed. I couldn't see the edit link. So what I did here is I just reviewed the build script, and what Travis CI does is these arrows indicate that there's more information about this step, so you can open it up, and you might get some indicators about why the build failed. So I'm opening this step of the Drush site install, and as I did it, it is reporting back. It says warning in features rebuild of that feature module that I created. No module defines permission edit any page content. And the reason was because in my install steps, it hadn't created the page content type at that point. It created it as in my .install. So I've developed another opportunity to enable modules, and I did that. I ran the site install locally to just do a bit more debugging, and then I decided to work on yeah, what I did was I removed that dependency from the .info file of my install profile, and I've created an install step which will allow me to enable modules after content type, that particular content type has been created. You could get around this by just saying, I'm going to create content types in the features, and then just add that feature as a dependency before you add the permissions to any roles for editing or maintaining that content type. So I was testing this out locally again, and it all passed after the build. Then committed it up, and just get into the test stage again. Yeah, and it's starting to run it now. It's actually running it as in Selenium, those first tests, but it all passes now. So the integrity of the install profile has been verified by Travis CI. So the last step that I would do here is, because I know it all works, the code that I've done can be introduced on reinstall on the website. I'm now happy with it, and I'll submit it as a pull request. And when you submit it as a pull request, it gets built again. But what it does in that step is that the master project may have changed in that window of time that you created your feature branch, and are submitting it as a pull request, it may have changed, but it may still be able to be merged in. So what it does is it'll check out the branch that you're merging to, that you submitted the pull request to, and then it'll merge in the code from the pull request, and then it'll run the test on that. So it's running the test on the code that would be there if it was merged together, and not just on your branch, because that might have some code in there that you haven't written yet, someone else did. And these are the monitors that I'm getting now after the pull request. Oh, would be good. But yeah, so this is happening live. I'm getting told that it's building it, so hold off merging in. I'm able to do it. It's not stopping me from doing it. It's just giving me a warning. And what these indicators are here on these indicate that those crosses and ticks, that those are points that the code was builds were made on those commits, and the crosses mean that it failed, and the ticks mean that it passed. So we get a history of what happened on Travis. And I'll just skip forward, but the pull request, it passes fine, and then on this screen here, it switches, and it took a little bit of time, but it came through eventually. It says, yeah, all is well. The Travis CI build passed. And then I'd be confident that I could merge it in, because it would all work. Any questions about that? So the limitations of Travis CI, some of them. There's redundancy in server setup. So if you've got build scripts for your Vagrant projects, which we do, chef scripts, then you introduce in your .travis.yaml file, and it's got like similar stuff in there as well. So you are creating a redundancy there. It's difficult to triage Travis builds. If something goes wrong, it's like you can't SSH in, it's gone then. So that's why in debugging, in that step when you're getting it set up, and it took me a while to get it set up initially. I think I had like 63 failed builds before I got the Eli site building correctly on Travis, and I was just outputting the logs, outputting as much as I could, so I can see it on Travis. There's also, we haven't hit it yet, but there's a 50-minute time limit for builds, and we're currently at around 15 minutes. And it's a self-hosted option. The self-hosted option is not currently available, so that might be a problem for some people. But there are alternatives that offer that. Here's some links where you can get help. I also found on the last one that there's always developers in the Campfire chat room, and they've been really helpful to me. So I've not really used the IRC room much, but the support's really good. And also, if you did want to try out on your private repositories, they give you like 100 trial builds, and if you need more, they'll give you more as well, because they just want to make sure that you're having a good experience with it, and that you're getting some use out of it before you commit to pay. But it's a monthly contract anyway, and it's really reasonable priced. So the next steps for eLife, we're recruiting. If you see this presentation and think, man, I know where he's falling over and I could totally do it way better, or I know somebody who can, please get in touch. Because we want to take this further and automate more of our processes. We want to extend the coverage of our BHAP tests to cover the current behavior of the website, and also we want to do more BGD and require that features are that acceptance criteria are laid out before we begin our sprints. We are now running some unit tests and functional tests on custom code, and we also want to check adherence to coding standards, because that's like, as part of the Travis CI build, that would be great, because that's a really boring task for developers to do, and developers telling one another that you're not adhering to this standard, that's just like, it's just cause for conflict. So let Travis CI do the grumbling and not the developer. And we'd also want to set up VPN to test some of the services that the website is using. We haven't done that currently. Here are some acknowledgements, just people who have helped me out, either directly or indirectly. Graham Taylor for the work that he did on the GitHub repository. You can fork his project and have a good experience with that too. Commerce Guys for the work they've done on Kickstart. That's really kind of spurred me on. Matthew Andrews for being a good support. I sent him a few pull requests, and he was really nice about it. And Constantine for his work with BHAT. That's really inspiring, the work that he's doing in the community. Any questions?
How is Travis CI with repos on Drupal?
Sorry, could you?
Repos. How work with Travis CI?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Bitbucket. No, it's just GitHub. Can anyone challenge that? I believe it's just GitHub at the moment. Yeah. No, you'd have to pay for your private. Yeah. Bitbucket offers some private repos for free. Yeah. And what GitHub you have to pay. Yeah, but just charge it to your clients. That's fine. Yeah. Any other questions?
In terms of using Travis CI for digital agents, would it be okay in cases to deploy projects into other computers?
I have an answer to that. Yeah, I believe that you could. I think your client would have to be open to it, and I think you'd have to give them assurances that you're not putting anything in there that they wouldn't want other people to see. But a lot of the code, consider if you're not writing any custom modules, right? It's all configuration. As long as you're not putting any sensitive credentials in there, but okay with your client, yeah. But I think you could probably do it in some cases, yeah. And give them access to Travis CI and they can see the builds happening. So I showed you the BDD stuff as well. I think for project managers or other stakeholders, that could get really interesting because they could monitor the progress of developers, not just by the code that they're committing to GitHub. That's an indicator that they're doing their job right. But you could go to Travis CI and see the tests that were passing and the tests that were failing. The failing tests indicates that there's work still to do. But you get an idea of progress on that. You could even tag your BHAT tests under with a sprint or something like that, and you could monitor things on there.
Organizations like Dennis Publishing try and get BHAT tests written by the actual client.
Yeah. We would just put those into the code base and run against those. Any more questions? That's yeah.
The controversial one is GitHub issue queue versus Drupal issue queue.
Yeah.
What's the verdict on that? You can't do a pull request on either.
I can't pretend to appreciate all of the complexities involved in doing that. But would I support a move to GitHub? Yeah, I would. Yeah. Yeah, that's it then. Thanks for listening. And if you've got any questions later in the day, please just or feedback, let me know.